Pledge to be there for your family with real life insurance from $1.46 a week. Your family will receive a lump sum payment when they need it most. It's easy to apply with no medical or paperwork required. And to say thanks, we'll give you back 10% of the premiums you've paid after the first 12 months. Plus, for a limited time, you'll receive a bonus $100 gift card. Get real. Call 1300 303 459 or search Real Life Insurance now.
It's easy to create my beautiful website with Wix.
Let's go again.
If only everything in business was as easy as Wix. Go to Wix.com and create your stunning website today. It's free.
A woman will appear in court today accused of murdering a 4-year-old boy and his grandmother with garden shears at a Melbourne home. The 45-year-old Chinese national allegedly bound and gagged her former lover at his home before fatally stabbing his grandson. Police allege she then waited at the property for 10 hours until the little boy's grandmother got home from work, then attacked and killed her in the backyard. Australians who can fund their own retirement could soon be receiving a trimmed-down aged pension. Social Services Minister Scott Morrison is looking at scaling back access to the pension as an alternative to the government's controversial changes to payment rates. According to News Corp, Mr Morrison's begun talks with Senate crossbenchers on a proposal to change the pension asset test in order to scale back the benefits for the richest retirees. Autopsies will be carried out on the remains of 55 greyhounds discovered in bushland near Bundaberg in Queensland. They were found in a council reserve in various states of decomposition. The state's Joint Greyhound Racing Inquiry Task Force is investigating the deaths along with police and the RSPCA. It's believed officers have recovered at least one microchip which could help identify those responsible. 2 women will create history when the New South Wales Cabinet's sworn in this morning. Gladys Berejiklian and Gabrielle Upton will become the first women in the state's history to hold the positions of Treasurer and Attorney General. Former country policeman Troy Grant's also been promoted, becoming Police and Justice Minister. The Chief Executive of Lufthansa and the head of Germanwings have paid their respects to the victims of last week's plane crash in the French Alps. The airline bosses visited the site to lay flowers. It comes as investigators called for any footage of the Germanwings plane crash to be handed over to authorities. In sport, after a drama-charged lead-up off the field, the AFL season finally gets underway tonight at the MCG. Carlton's taking on Richmond. Tigers veteran Chris Newman's been named despite undergoing heart surgery a fortnight ago. A look at the weather: showers along the east coast with heavy rain possible in southeastern Queensland. A cooler day over southern states, dry and warm on the west coast.
Live, this is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Good morning and welcome to the program. The government has opened negotiations with Senate crossbenchers on a possible shake-up of the asset test for pensioners. It's aimed at breaking the deadlock over change to payment rates for the age pension. The plan being considered a possible scaling back of the benefits for the wealthiest retirees. Now, this is the front page of The Australian this morning, reporting that the federal government considering a breakthrough proposal to trim the pension for wealthy Australians who can fund their own retirement. And the AFR as well, the Fin Review Weekend edition, heading into the Easter weekend. Wealthy retirees face Morrison's budget raiser. The government may cut wealthier retirees from the part pension instead of reining in the rate of pension increases for everyone. Mr Morrison was discussing this generally yesterday and says he's not wedded to any particular idea, but he wants agreement, broad agreement across the parliament.
This is not about indexation or assets tests or anything like that specifically. It's about getting to a point where we can be in agreement about the measures that will deliver a sustainable pension. That's the goal. That's what I'm wedded to, and the government is wedded to the goal. And our goal is to have a sustainable and adequate pension for the future. And it's clear that if you just keep going down the path Labor is suggesting, which is to stick your head in the sand and do nothing, well, you'll run the pension off the edge of a cliff.
The Prime Minister also discussing this broader issue this morning. He was on the Alan Jones program on 2GB.
Under the Howard government, we had a scheme whereby if you worked past 65, you could get a benefit through the pension system when you finally did retire, and it's certainly worth looking at, Alan.
With me on the program this morning, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Kelly O'Dwyer, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader, Jim Chalmers. Good morning to you both. Kelly, where is this debate at? How seriously should the government be looking at this, reining in particularly the part pension for those with upwards of $1 million in terms of assets beyond the family home?
Well, certainly we have said with the tax debate that is currently going on at the moment, you'll recall that we released a tax discussion paper earlier in the week. We have said that we are going to consider all of the options available. We're not going to rule anything in or out. We believe that it is the right time now to look at every aspect of the tax system holistically. We know that on the current projections, our tax system is not sustainable for the years ahead. We've got 125 taxes at a state, territory, federal level, and around about 110 of those taxes raise around about 10%, and the remainder raise the final 90%. Now clearly there is a problem with our tax system. So we've said we're going to look at all of that, but at the same time, there's not just one part of the equation here, which is ever increasing taxes. You also have to look at the current trajectory of spending. And we have also said that we are going to continue to tackle Labor's unfunded promises that they made before they left office that do need funding, such as the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We want to make sure that good schemes like that will be funded into the future. When we talk about the age pension, for instance, we know that the age pension is going to go up anywhere between 2.7% of GDP, which it currently is at the moment, to more than 3.7% of GDP, around that figure, and that's around $14 billion. Now that $14 billion would fund the full NDIS, and we have to make sure that we have a sustainable budget that can fund all of the services that need to be delivered.
Jim, on this issue, I guess, and in the context of what Kelly just said there, is it sustainable to have a system where people can receive the part pension when they have $1.1 million in private wealth in addition to the family home and still qualify for a part pension?
Oh, look, Kieran, there are a whole lot of important issues at play here when it comes to the pension and its interaction with the superannuation system. Of course, Tony Abbott promised that there'd be absolutely no changes to the pension on the eve of the election and many times before and since. And the only policy that's on the table from the Liberal government right now is a cut to the indexation, and we remain opposed to the cut to that indexation. Our view on these broader issues, Kieran, is if you want to make the age pension more sustainable, the best way to do that is to fix the superannuation system to make sure that more Australians can fund the good life in retirement themselves and not rely on the pension system. That's why we think it is really important that we have a proper national conversation about superannuation, particularly the unfairness at the very top of super, because we think if you want to make the pension system sustainable, that means improving the superannuation system. Unfortunately, the Abbott government has frozen increases to the superannuation guarantee and cut the low-income super contribution, which goes against that really important objective.
This seems to fit in, though, with Labor's broader view about these matters when you talk about the unfair treatment of super for the wealthiest individuals, the exemptions and so on, that the same principles you would think would apply when it comes to the issue of the part pension, which I think would surprise many, that couples, pensioners with upwards of $1 million in private wealth, in addition to the family home, still receiving a part pension.
Well, it's worth reminding ourselves, Kieran, that the current government policy is to cut the indexation of the pension, which will hurt millions of pensioners, people who are doing it tough, battlers in our community. That is the existing policy of the government. That's the one that we're opposing. Beyond that, we think if you want to make the entire retirement incomes system more sustainable, which is an important objective, we should be looking at the superannuation system. More broadly, you're right to say that when we oppose parts of this failed budget, we have applied the principle that the people who are the poorest in our community, the people on low and middle and fixed incomes, shouldn't be carrying the can for this so-called budget emergency con that's being pushed by Kelly and Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey and others. We are up for a proper conversation about tax reform. Kelly referred before to the tax reform paper that was released. Chris Bowen, Bill Shorten and others have indicated they were up for a proper discussion, particularly about superannuation, but across the tax system. And we will participate in that conversation. We'll lead it if the government fails.
Kelly O'Dwyer, on a couple of those issues, you can respond to Jim Chalmers, and I guess specifically on the superannuation debate, the thing that I guess needs to be addressed here is if these exemptions are reined in, that the revenue is still going to come into the government, because people won't necessarily keep shoveling their money into super, will they? High wealth individuals, if the exemptions are removed entirely, they'll simply look for other asset classes to put their money.
Well, obviously you make a good point there, Kieran, but first let me just address a couple of the points that Jim raised. The first is he says, like Labor, that there is no budget emergency. Now, it's not the Coalition who has been saying this. It's not just the Coalition who has been pointing out that the current trajectory of spending is unsustainable. It's been pointed out by a number of Treasury Secretaries, Martin Parkinson, John Fraser, the current Treasury Secretary. It's been pointed out by Glenn Stevens, the Reserve Bank Governor, and none other than the former Principal Economic Advisor to Paul Keating, Dr John Edwards, who was appointed by Wayne Swan, Jim's former boss, to the Reserve Bank Board, who said that there is a budget emergency. So let's not pretend that there isn't an issue here. There is an issue. We need to deal with it. We've said we're going to deal with it, and that's what we were elected to do. The second point I'd make is in relation to pensions. Now, Jim wants to claim that somehow we are cutting the pension. That is not the case at all. There have been pension increases every year, twice a year, and will continue to be so going forward. We just had one in March. That has meant that there is an extra $51 in the hands of pensioners per fortnight, an extra, $78 for couples who are also receiving the pension per fortnight. Now, if he wants to talk about the change in indexation arrangements, there's one thing that he hasn't mentioned, and that is in changing from the male total average weekly earnings to the consumer price index, at different times, different indexation rates are better for pensioners. Now, if we had, if you stick with the male total average weekly earnings in more recent times, that hasn't been as good as the consumer price index, which is what we're moving it to. So I just won't let the Labor Party get away with making a statement like that. Finally, on superannuation, as we've said, we'll look at all aspects of this discussion, and we do want to make sure that the system that is in place is fair to everybody, and that also means that those people who have made arrangements based on existing rules need to be dealt with fairly if there is to be any consideration of any change to those rules. But the one thing you'll never hear Labor talking about, they'll always talk about increasing taxes, but you will never hear them talk about where they are going to reduce spending. They don't even accept that there's a problem. And that's what I'd like to hear Bill Shorten and Jim Chalmers actually talk about.
But I guess the question is how committed is the government to this bipartisanship that Mr Morrison wants on this issue, given yesterday you had a bit of a dig there, yesterday the Prime Minister saying that Labor goes straight to higher taxes. It doesn't sound like a Prime Minister extending the olive branch of bipartisanship, but I'll get back to you, Kelly, on that. You can respond to it. But Jim, to you, how significant is it, you've watched these areas for a long time now, to get reform in these very difficult areas? How important is it, Jim Chalmers, to have bipartisanship so that these things aren't tweaked down the track for certainty for the pension, for super as well?
Yeah, look, just to correct two factual errors in Kelly's answer. The first thing is there are cuts to the pension. That's why her own budget papers identify billions of dollars of savings out of the pension. That comes out of pensioners' pockets. Second thing is she said earlier that the NDIS, the disability scheme, wasn't funded. It was. To move on to your question, Kieran, it is important that the political system as a whole, both major parties, where possible, come to some sort of agreement on the direction of the country. That does make, as Joe Hockey has said, as Chris Bowen has said, as Bill Shorten has said, that does make it more likely that changes to the budget and changes to economic policy can be enduring. You were right to point out to Kelly that we've got a big problem on the government side. We've got Joe Hockey saying he wants a conversation about tax, and we've got Tony Abbott within 24 hours showing that he's not prepared to have that conversation. I think that Tony Abbott's response to the tax paper shows why he is failing as a national leader. It proves to the Australian community that when he's given the opportunity to try and build a consensus and help improve the budget, he'd prefer to have a brawl and attack people on low and middle income earners. And I think that's why the majority of his own backbench don't support him, and I think that's why the Australian community have lined up to oppose this Prime Minister and his unfair budget. Okay, Kelly, your to wrap up, your reaction to that, but also, I guess, on the government's approach here, you've got Scott Morrison saying that he wants a broader agreement, broad deal done, but how much incentive is there for the crossbench and particularly the opposition to get on board when Mr Abbott this week has had a crack saying, you know, their first inclination is to go for a tax grab. Now you want them around the table to do a deal on the pension.
Well, everyone on the coalition side has been consistent in saying that we want to do two things. We want to make sure that we address the budget situation that we inherited. We're going to do that in a very calm and methodical way, and we're going to do that by actually having an open discussion with the Australian people. But you can't only address one aspect of this problem, and that's the point the Prime Minister's made, that's the point the Treasurer's made, that's the point Scott Morrison has made. You also have to look at the current trajectory of spending. Everybody has made this point, including Glenn Stevens, the former secretaries of the Treasury, and as I said, Dr John Edwards. This is not a new concept. It just seems to be very difficult for the Labor Party to understand it, because in understanding it, they have to accept a very strong measure of responsibility for the situation we currently face. Now, the people who are going to be most hurt if we find ourselves in a situation where we have uncontrolled spending and we have an economic shock to our country are going to be those people who are the most vulnerable in our community. So I won't have any crocodile tears from Jim Chalmers. We are looking to protect those very people by making sure that we have a strong budget that can fund the services that Australians expect to be delivered by government.
Kelly and Jim, we've got to take a quick break. Back in just a moment, we'll look at the defence shake-up and some comments on the GST the Prime Minister's made this morning.
Meet Robert Potter. He creates mountain bike trails deep in the Tasmanian wilderness. There's just some places he couldn't go without his Ford Ranger. Technology like hill descent control makes it possible. Technology that Hilux doesn't have. For Rob, it's all about helping people see just how great the outdoors can be. Ford Ranger with hill descent control technology.
Anton's Animal Kingdom. Anton! How may I help you? Help! Be quiet! Quiet! Silence!
If only everything was as easy as creating your website with Wix. Go to Wix.com today. It's free.
Guess who just got 60 points on the Amy Safe Driver app, baby?
The current trends in the modelling suggest...
Hey Mel, I was trying to...
Amy Comprehensive Car Insurance customers who earn 60 points on Amy Safe Driver app now receive roadside assist free on renewal.
Wally has a disease called trachoma. Left untreated, trachoma will destroy his sight, and then it'll destroy his life. Over time, his eyelashes will grow inwards, scraping his eyes with every blink, every movement. It's an agonizing way to lose your sight. Yet treated early enough, trachoma can be cured. It's what teams from the Fred Hollows Foundation are doing in Ethiopia right now. quick and simple operations that can save people's sight. But hundreds of children and adults need us. Please call 1-800-072-355 to give just $25 a month and help us save sight. Your $25 can help someone like Wally to see again. You can actually change their life. So please call 1-800-072-355 or go online and help end the trauma of preventable blindness. Thank you so much.
Roll it, rise it, break it, toast it.
Freshly baked 680-gram sliced loaf varieties, just $2.
Need it, pack it, make it, boast it.
Freshly baked 6-pack lunch rolls, $2.
What's the fresh food people? Stack it,
tear it,
take it,
share it.
Freshly baked hot cross buns, $3.20 each.
What's the fresh food people with fresh ideas for you?
This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, Kelly O'Dwyer and Jim Chalmers. The Prime Minister has been discussing the GST and the possibility of any change to it this morning. He was on, as I say, the Alan Jones program on 2GB. Let's recap a bit of what he had to say.
When it comes to the GST, we can't change the GST without the agreement of all the states and territories, and we couldn't change the GST without a consensus in the Parliament. So really, it's up to Mr. Shorten to tell us what he wants to do, because he is the man who controls the GST effectively.
Kelly O'Dwyer, the Prime Minister, washing his hands of this issue, saying it's Bill Shorten who controls the GST despite being in opposition.
Well, the Prime Minister is simply making the point that in order to change the GST, you do need the agreement of the states and territories, and you do need the cooperation of the Labor Party in order to get any legislation through the Parliament. It's pretty much a statement of fact. So for the most part, I don't see it as particularly remarkable.
Well, my understanding is that the government can legislate to override all of that, and the federal government can still pursue this if they wanted to. But Jim Chalmers, Labor, is not going to countenance any shift in the GST in broadening its base or lifting its rate, despite the urgings of many, many economists who believe that this is part of a broader tax reform that's needed.
Oh, look, this isn't the first time, Kieran, that Tony Abbott's shown that he'd prefer to be the opposition leader of this country rather than the Prime Minister of this country. You're right that we've made our view. You're right that we've made our view very clear. We don't agree that the best tax reform is to jack up the GST and to broaden the base, for a very simple reason, and that's because doing that would hurt the most vulnerable people in our community the most. That's why we've said that we're not in the cart for an increase in the GST or a broadening of its base. But what the tax discussion paper that was released earlier this week showed, and I think it's an important point, is that there are other avenues for tax reform. The GST hike that the government wants, that they've made very clear over some time now they'd like to see, is not the only way to improve or change the tax system in our community. And what the government did is they took $80 billion out of schools and hospitals. It's on page 7 of their budget overview, $80 billion, in the desperate hope that the only way to fill that hole would be with a GST hike. But what the tax discussion paper shows that there are other avenues. We're up for a conversation on those other avenues, those other opportunities for tax reform, whether they be superannuation, whether they be multinational tax, all of those other areas. And we want to play a constructive, leading, responsible role in that important tax conversation that the country should be having, but we're not in the cart for hurting the most vulnerable people, especially given all the damage done to those people by the Abbott budget.
This is something that your former boss, Kelly O'Dwyer, Peter Costello, he also doesn't believe there should be. He doesn't see the case for an increase in the GST, well, certainly not on its own. He says that it needs to be a much more comprehensive reform of the tax system if a government was to go down that path.
Well, certainly when he introduced the GST, he got rid of a whole host of other taxes. So it wasn't simply a matter of just raising taxes, it was getting rid of a whole host of taxes that were inefficient and that were really not enhancing competition. And it has meant that we have been able to benefit now from that change, and the state governments have been able to benefit because every single dollar raised by the GST goes to the states and territories to fund their programs and their services and their infrastructure, and we saw huge windfalls go to the states and territories in order to do just that. Now, some people may argue that perhaps they didn't always spend that money wisely, and we're seeing some of the fruits of that today with the lack of infrastructure development that now requires the federal government to step in with one of the biggest infrastructure spending programs that has ever been, more than $50 billion that we injected in the last federal budget into ensuring that we have the sort of infrastructure that this nation needs. But look, there are a lot of people with a lot of views on the GST. We welcome that. That's part of what this debate is all about. It isn't true for Jim to say that in our last budget we were cutting hospital spending and health spending.
It's in your own budget
and education
papers,
spending. No, we increased over the forward estimates. We increased spending to all of those.
It says 80 billion out of schools and hospitals in your own budget papers, page 7 of the budget overview.
I listened to you over the forward estimates.
You haven't read your own budget.
No, I have. I listened to you
page 7 of the overview.
Very quietly. Well, read more than the overview. Over the forward estimates, we actually increased spending to all those areas, and Labor left huge holes. We know that just with Gonski, for instance, they had unfunded in education $1.2 billion that we had to find the money for, and we did.
Rubbish.
Jim, in terms of the, just to wrap up on this debate, the GST, I'm a little bit, I know that Labor consistently says that the poorest will be worse off, but if you look at the welfare proposals under previous GST increases, they have been accompanied by compensation and further reductions, like the carbon tax, for example. When you introduced the carbon tax, Labor, you had parallel compensation to help people because that was a flat tax. If it's more efficient, why doesn't Labor even consider it?
I don't think that the Abbott government, with the form they've shown on their budget decisions so far, would ever adequately compensate people on low and middle and fixed incomes. They've gone out of their way over the last 18 months to attack those people in the community, people who live week to week. And so I don't believe that they'd ever be adequately compensated. But there's a broader principle at stake. We do want to talk about tax reform. There are other, fairer, more efficient, more worthy ways to skin the tax reform cat, and we should be talking about those. We'd be honest and put our cards on the table about the GST.
Guys, we're out of time, unfortunately. Thanks so much, Jim Chalmers, Kelly O'Dwyer. Have a good day. Happy Easter.
Pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
You too.
A quick break. Back in just a moment. Stay with us.
You know your local pharmacy offers so much more. It isn't just what you can see, there's services galore. All pharmacies are different, just like communities. So ask your pharmacist and discover more than you can see.
Meet Robert Potter. He creates mountain bike trails deep in the Tasmanian wilderness. There's just some places he couldn't go without his Ford Ranger. Technology like hill descent control makes it possible. Technology that Hilux doesn't have. For Rob, it's all about helping people see just how great the outdoors can be. Ford Ranger with hill descent control technology.
Take a 10-minute Lumosity fit test to challenge memory, attention and more. First, you'll play 3 fun brain games to get your baseline scores. How? We compare you against people worldwide and tell you how you measure up. Then, we'll build a training program just for you. You'll train with games that challenge key abilities like speed and problem solving. Train 4 times a week and enjoy your brain training journey. Start your fit test at lumosity.com.
Enjoy the taste of teriyaki at Subway with our mouth-watering sauce made from garlic, ginger, sesame seeds and more. Try it over succulent chicken strips in our chicken teriyaki, only at Subway.
So you're probably wondering, do you really need funeral insurance?
You don't want anything really over the top, like a marble statue. And besides, when the time comes, you'll probably have the money tucked away. Well, hold on to your hat, because even a basic funeral costs around $6,000 now, and many Australian families can't raise that much money in a hurry. So it's great to leave your loved ones a helping hand with funeral insurance from Insurance Line. They make funeral insurance easier to afford, with premiums that are guaranteed never to go up. That means you can count on your premiums to stay the same and not creep up as you get older, like with many other funeral insurers. And the money will be there fast when your family needs it, usually within 24 hours of lodging a complete claim. Plus, get covered today and you'll get a bonus Android tablet once you've had your new policy for 2 months. So call 1335 65 and get funeral insurance now.
Let's go again. Don't do it.
If only everything was as easy as creating your website with Wix. Go to Wix.com today. It's free.
Delivering unrivaled live coverage. This is Sky News Live, Australia's news channel. Live, this is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
It's 9 in Canberra, 6 in Perth. This is AM Agenda. These are our top stories. The government hoping to overcome a Senate deadlock by possibly trimming the age pension for wealthier retirees. The woman charged with murdering a 4-year-old boy and his grandmother in Melbourne due in court later today. Members of the New South Wales Cabinet to be sworn in, with 2 female MPs set to make history. Today's weather: showers along the east coast with heavy rain possible in southeast Queensland. A cooler day over the southern states, dry and warm on the west coast. The government's opened negotiations with the crossbench on a possible shake-up of the asset test